I want you to let me do the update for the Via Francigena, because that's the route I'd like to focus on for the rest of my guidebook career. And they said, well, okay. So then I got to work on it. And the first thing that I learned was that Italians tended to start at the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass. And to me, having walked over the pass, that didn't make any sense. I believe that it was a division of the route at the Great St. Bernard Pass that encouraged people to think that's the place that you start if you're not going to do it all the way. It's hard with public transportation to get up to the top of the pass. It's closed most of the year. And so people are going to miss, in my opinion, what are some of the best parts of it, such as walking along Lake Geneva from Lausanne to Villeneuve, and then heading up the route in great towns like Saint-Maurice and Martigny, and then making the actual climb up to the Great St. Bernard Pass on the Swiss side. It's scenically very beautiful. And so I made the proposal to Cicerone that we would start volume 2 at Lausanne rather than at the Great St. Bernard Pass. And so whenever I'm on Facebook or social media and I see somebody is starting at Lausanne, I'm like, hooray, the plan is working. They're getting to see both sides of the Great St. Bernard Pass. And then to start at Lausanne and go to Rome would make that volume too long. When you look at the numbers on the Via Francigena, the largest numbers are from Tuscany into Lazio. So it made sense also for people to be able to buy a slim volume that just has the last part from Lucca or Siena then on to Rome. So I think it's made perfect sense. And I hope now that you know all the reasons that it makes sense to you too, Brian.
No, indeed, it does indeed, because obviously one doesn't want to start at the very best, which is at the top of the Grand Saint Bernard. I can see that. That's interesting. So you've done the sort of, if you like, the downhill parts. Well, not quite. You've got the uphill as well, but you've done volumes 2 and 3, but 1 is still to come. Can we talk about 1 a little bit before we go into 2 and 3? That is to say, the Canterbury to Lausanne, and I have sort of a little request there too on behalf of the Confraternity, which is that we are working very hard to map out and really test on boots on the ground a feeder route from London. And there are many people who, for one reason or another, come to London to start the Via Francigena and would actually rather start it from London than to take the train to Canterbury. And there are many people starting in England who walk through London. So that seemed to be a sort of logical thing. And I know it's not part of the official Via Francigena, but it would be good if you haven't already literally set it up in stone for you to take that into account. But let us ask a little bit, if you can, how far down the road are you with your Canterbury volume?
I'm about halfway done with it now. It's due at the end of May. It will be produced through the rest of this year, printed in December and out in February. So there's a lot of work still to go. I just finished walking it in early November, and I have to say it was hard. And we can come back to that if you like, but I finished it then. In the meantime, I took on, for some people in California, the writing of a volume on the new California Missions Trail that covers the 21 Spanish missions in California from the Bay Area to San Diego. So I walked that, rode it twice on bicycles, and then wrote a volume that will be out this October. So that's distracted me a little bit. Now it's nose to the grindstone on Via Francigena.
Can I then jump in? I mean, I think it's of critical interest to many of us who've walked the Via Francigena, and indeed those who are planning to the journey through France, because I think it is quite well recognized, and you'll come on later to talk about the route from Lausanne down to Rome, and that's now pretty well waymarked, quite well structured in terms of accommodation and so on. Whereas France has always been a bit of a moving feast, and I don't know anyone who's ever walked the same way through France. There are always slight variations, and I know that the French, insofar as they've collaborated with the establishment of this route, have always tended to sort of to be a little bit selfish and wanting to go through their backyard and around their particular corner. And so what sort of decisions did you make in terms of making the route a bit more direct, following that dictum that long distance walkers do it in a straight line rather than taking the scenic route?
Right, right. Well, first of all, what year did you do your walk back and forth from Rome, to and from Rome?
2010 down and 2012 back.
Okay. So I think things have changed. Obviously, I haven't walked that part of the route except for the time last year that I did it from Calais to Lausanne. And the news in the last few years is that in France, the Via Francigena equals the GR 145. So the Grande Randonnée 145 is a route that goes like this.
But it's serpent. It's very circuitous. It is
exactly. That's the zigzag part of it.
And that's the challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, in one sense, it's good because the French, as they put it together, said, we don't want people to spend all their time on pavement. So we see a field with a wood over there, let's go over there. And it's very easy to see on a map how you can shorten many of the roundabout ways that they've taken to get from A to B. But that was actually part of my frustration this year. To walk the guidebook, I had to walk the entire GR 145. So I walked every little triangle that goes out from a straight line, so I would know in my mind where everything was going. It's a lot easier just to look at a map and say, oh, instead of going to C in order to get from A to B, I'll just go from A to B. So I'm heading back in mid-April, and I'm with a friend on my bicycle this time, and we're going to confirm the shortcuts that exist. I can see them on a map, and I saw them in person as I walked it, but I'm not going to put them in the book until I've confirmed them in person.
Sandry, that's very interesting. I mean, I'm going to follow through on this because it's one of my bugbears. The way that the French serpent, they're very circuitous routes. Particularly their GRs, they don't have one GR that goes in a relatively straight line, even though they've had plenty of Roman roads over the centuries. But one thing that Alison did was to, where possible and where convenient, she indicated in her guide where there was effectively a shorter route. Are you going to do that, or are you going to leave the reader to snake their way through France?
No, I'll be showing the shorter routes.
Yeah.
Now, this is an official guidebook of the European Association of Via Francigena, and so I'm obligated to show the actual GR 145 route as well. And so I'll be doing both. And in some cases, the GR 145 gives you a more pleasant walk. For instance, south of Rennes, there's Châlons-en-Champagne and some lovely towns that Cedric never saw the inside of. And the classic route is a little bit straighter, but gosh, Châlons-en-Champagne is beautiful. Yeah. So there's some advantages as well to the GR 145/Via Francigena.
Well, I mean, except you interesting. You refer to the Châlons-en-Champagne because actually you can follow the canal entre Bourgogne and Champagne, and you've got a wonderful towpath all the way down there, almost as far as Besançon. And I recognize that is parallel with the official Via Francigena, but the official Via Francigena goes through a desert. So all I would plead on behalf of long distance walkers like myself is that you should, and it doesn't take an awful lot to read a map and work it out for ourselves, but it would be quite good to occasionally indicate alternatives. And that's certainly what Alison did, particularly in the Aosta Valley part, where there are also other strange circuitous routes that lead you up valleys that you don't actually need to go on.
I was just going to say that what I did in volume 2 in the Aosta Valley is an example of that, because there's an official bicycle route that's equivalent to Alison's route in her volume 2 Via Francigena. And that is flat, more or less, because it runs along the river, whereas the official route is up on the mountainsides and up and down all the way. So it's nice to have an option. In that case, one other case in the Aosta Valley, that's exactly what I did. So what I did in that is I described and showed the official route, but then the alternate I showed on the map with a very brief description. So that's the way I'll approach volume 1 as well.
Well, that's very interesting. So France is probably going to be the country or the section that would require more alternative suggestions than perhaps the Swiss and Italian. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah. And I mentioned earlier that I found the Francigena in France to be tough, and part of it was my my self-imposed requirement to do all of the GR 145, but also there are sometimes large distances between accommodations and between places where you can get food, grocery stores, bakeries, or restaurants. And so it really does take a lot of good planning in advance. And since I was about half day away through Paris of getting back to Lucca, I did it a couple of times just for my own sanity, and then went back into the wilds of rural France to continue my walk.
Well, I mean, having walked across France 8 times now, the length and breadth of it, I know very well that one is very often, they talk about the désertification de la France, la France profonde. One is very often totally without water or supplies, and the only time you can often find water is in the cemeteries, the tap that feeds the cemeteries. But France, it would be interesting to know, Sandry, and then we'll stop on this, but the 145, the GR, how many more kilometers does that impose on you than if you were to take a more direct route?
I don't know quite the answer to that. I would guess in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 kilometers. It's quite a bit.
So you're looking really at an extra an extra week's walking, basically. I mean, that is the problem. And if you're looking at the 2,000 odd kilometers, it starts to add significantly to the journey. Anyway, I think most people, and that's one of the reasons I'm sure you'd agree that the Via Francigena is something that really should only be done after walkers have had a little bit of experience of long distance walking and map reading and route finding, because it's not all as straightforward as the Camino Frances, is it? I mean, and that I think is the French section in particular illustrates that problem. And of course, although it's flat, so initially it's not a huge challenge for those leaving Canterbury, it is quite frustrating. Would you not agree?
Yeah, we agree on that. I think it's really prime for people that are experienced. Yeah, although I would have to say that you could do Italy as a first-time walker now. The infrastructure has improved quite a bit over the last few years. There have been some problems with COVID closures, and we have to see what's coming in infrastructure as things open back up in the next few months.
It's just going on to a couple of sections. The climb up to the Saint Bernard, you recommend to do that in 2 stages?
Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, it's 25 to 28 kilometers, I think, and it's not bad to stop at Bourg Saint-Pierre because it's not a bad little town. It has some Roman artifacts. one of the most charming things, I think, is the IOU from Napoleon Bonaparte, who promised but never did, to pay for his 40,000 troops that came through there when he was on his way to conquer Italy.
Can I interrupt there? That was at the Grand Saint-Bernard, not at Bourg Saint-Pierre. And Mitterrand, the French president, did finally pay the reparations. And do you know how much he paid?
No, how much?
A symbolic franc.
Okay.
No, the unpaid bill was at the Grand Saint-Bernard. But I quite agree that missing Bourg Saint-Pierre is a pity. But actually, for those listening who have not done it or are thinking of doing it, it is a totally feasible, quite easy walk up directly in one day. Yeah. So I wouldn't put people off. I mean, if anything, it's easier because you follow a very straight path or a very straightforward path on the banks of the river or the stream, as it is, the mountain stream. So it's not an undoable thing. I mean, the challenge, of course, at the Grand Saint-Bernard is not so much the 1 day, 2 day, it's the weather and whether or not it's snowbound.
Exactly, right.
And when you've passed it, it's always been no doubt free of snow and
I go over the Great St. Bernard Pass in August. And my first time across the pass was about the 8th of August. It was quite cold in the afternoon when I arrived. And then the next day it snowed. So about the 7th or 8th of August, there was snow. It was only at the top, it was only about an inch, but that's an indicator of what you can expect at that kind of elevation, for sure. And in terms of 1 or 2 days, I don't think it really matters. It depends on your own stamina. But my own feeling is don't rush it. I think the last day from Bourg Saint-Pierre up to the top of the pass in August or September is very, very beautiful, with the reservoir lake and the moss covering the stones. We watched wildlife. I don't know what it was, woodchucks or something like that. Watched the streams coming down the mountainside. It was very, very beautiful. I was with my wife the second time, and we scrambled up that last bank before the hospice and then went between the buildings to look out at the lake at the top, and she burst into tears. She said, I can't believe it. On top of everything else, it's so beautiful up here at the top. So I'll never forget that. And then, of course, we had a full afternoon to explore around at the top. And I'm not that into St. Bernard's, but we went across and had some coffee at the Hotel Italia. And Teresa was impressed with the young, dark-haired Italian waiters up there, which would be a prelude to, the next 1,000 kilometers in restaurants.
Very nice. Well, we've talked, of course, the descent is glorious as well, following all those lovely little streams. We've talked a bit about the Aosta Valley. Let's come on to the Po. Did you do much in the way of rerouting? And I mean, is there much rerouting over those rice fields? Because certainly when I have been there, and I've been several times back to talk to Danilo and so on, and I know the sort of the Po area very well, that those rice fields are not much fun to navigate through. I mean, what about the waymarking there?
The waymarking is good. You clicked a story in my mind, though, back to the Aosta Valley for just a moment. Mm-hmm. And the story is every time I've come down from Great St. Bernard Pass, I've walked all the way to Aosta. To me, I mean, it's a 30-kilometer, maybe 32-kilometer day. It's all downhill. There's really no cardio challenge to it. It's really a question of how good are your shoes and socks where you get blisters. Timothy Egan famously got blisters, which ruined him for the rest of his trip. But for me, that's the way to do the downhill. In the Po Valley, I did find a way to do a shortcut in the Po Valley. I established a relationship with a bicycle rental agency in Ivrea. And my second time through, I rented a bike in Ivrea, sent my backpack to Fidenza, and then shipped the bicycle back to the bike dealer in Ivrea. And that cut by a little more than half my days in the Po Valley. There was only one place that was difficult to bike, and that was where there were some dams among the levees and narrow passageways. But otherwise, it was a perfectly easy bike ride. So that's one way to do it. I think the Po Valley is so very easy that, it's in a way, and some people have compared it to this, it's like the Meseta in Spain, that it's almost a emotional, mental challenge. And to continue on through the rice fields as they change to fields of maize, corn, in the southern part of the valley, I think there are some rewards. Piacenza, Pavia, I find both to be charming towns. And so I'm happy to go there. A nice side trip, by the way, is to go to Parma when you're in the Po Valley. I think Parma is a gorgeous little university town.
Going back, I'm going to jump in. Going back to Fidenza, you had a sort of question mark in your mind over those lovely pilgrims on the frieze on the tower of the cathedral, suggesting that they might have been returning crusaders.
I don't know if you're thinking of me or of Allison, but I did read an art historian that said that there are indeed some pilgrims on the friezes, I guess you would say, at the cathedral at Fidenza. But there are others that are not. And so I think sometimes the ones that are and the ones that are not are confused in our iconography of the Via Francigena.
Yeah, I think all anyone's ever claimed is that they are early medieval pilgrims. No one is ever certain which way they're going and what they represent. But certainly, I mean, there's the famous leopard on the back of a horse, and he's there because he's been used to hunt for the knight's evening meal, and pity the poor peasants who got in the way. But there are definitely walking pilgrims, pilgrims with skulls and with staffs, who would be, if you like, pilgrims that Chaucer would recognize. So I think it's quite legitimate that the Via Francigena itself has borrowed the icon of those pilgrims to make its own brand, if you like.
It makes sense, especially since the headquarters of the Francigena are right there in Fidenza, just a stone's throw away.
And it's also worth pointing out, of course, that you have one of the first road signs with the statue of Peter pointing the way to Rome at the Western Portal. So Fidenza makes a very special stop. Tell us a bit about your experiences with Danilo Parisi and the Admiral of the Po.
Well, he's a wonderful guy. And the first time I went through there, I took the boat, enjoyed it very much. Second time, I was on my bicycle and I wanted to explore the route that goes directly into Piacenza along the dikes, which, by the way, is just fine. In a way, it's preferable to go that way because after you take the boat, you're stuck on the roadside in the industrial entry into Piacenza. So I explored the other route. I took my ride with Danilo. It was trouble-free, and he gave his wonderful stamp onto my credential. And then I made the mistake talking about Pope Francis and refugees. And Danilo and I had a little bit of an argument about what is true Catholicism. But anyway, he's a great guy. And it's too special to miss the boat. I mean, that's an iconic thing of the Francigena. But if for some reason,
I'm going to jump in. Are you aware that he has this great big sort of encyclopedia now of everyone who's passed through his hands since he restarted the ferry, and
he showed me.
Annual statistics are really quite, the statistical breakdown are fascinating. They make interesting reading. In fact, I can share this with viewers today. His figures for 2021 were 609 pilgrims, which is quite a recovery from the previous year, and not up to the 1,400 that he was carrying pre-COVID, but it shows that the footfall is returning, which is all very encouraging.
Well, and I think it's true, isn't it, that the Confraternity had something to do with him getting a boat for this year? Is that right?
More than that, his boat was vandalized during the lockdown, taken out and sunk, and the engine stolen. And so the Confraternity launched a worldwide, global appeal, and members from across the globe stepped up to the plate and put in money, and we bought him a new boat, and it is effectively the Confraternity's boat. So there was some co-funding, some additional funds came in from the local municipality and the regional government, but it was essentially as our initiative to put it to launch him again. So we regard Danilo as a very special part of of the wider Via Francigena family, and he is central to the whole re-establishment of the Via Francigena in the late 90s, following the great work done by the historians that you mentioned in your introduction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if the timing of it works for you, then go with Danilo. If it doesn't, which I think he likes to leave his dock at something like 8:30, that gives plenty of time to get into Piacenza. I understand, though, that the Ostello in Oriolita is closed now. And so the nearby Ostello is Corte San Andrea, which is great. That's right at the boat dock. But if something doesn't work, you're not at much of a disadvantage to walk from there to Piacenza.
That's very useful information. And do you want to share with us any further sort of, I mean, obviously the walk through Tuscany is kind of, it's seared in all of our hearts. It's sort of one of the lovely, scenic, great experiences. What about some of the slightly more challenging sort of high ground on the Apennines? Did you have any sort of issues there with waymarking and route finding?
The waymarking is good. I always have a GPS function, a GPS app on my phone. Those are super helpful. I take along the tracks. I'm recording tracks at the same time. The Via Francigena app is excellent. And so it's hard to get lost with all of those resources. Crossing the Apennines, I think, is really fabulous. I'm not particularly a fan of the village or the town of Fornovo di Taro. I find it a kind of an industrial town. It's got the great church there, the chapel, that has its own friezes in bas-relief from about the same time period, I think, as in Fidenza. But the walk up from there is really wonderful. So I skipped Bercetto. I stayed at Cassio the last time, which was fine. It's an old school converted into an ostello. And then a person has to decide, and this is where guidebooks are helpful. If you go down to the hostel at Passo della Cisa, then your temptation is to walk up the road to cross the Passo della Cisa, which is a mistake. You should go back on the trail and take the trail up to Monte Valloria, because it is epic. So you do climb. It's on a forested path, but then the trees disappear and you're out into a bald grass-covered mountain from which you can see the mountaintops all around you on the Apennines. And you're not on the side of a mountain as often you are, you're at the very top of it. So it may even feel for somebody that is acrophobic a little, a little dizzying, but there's very little like it on any hike except when you get to a mountaintop and you're there at the top looking down 100 or 360 degrees. There's another one that follows not long afterwards. It's a little bit lower that you'd still make if you go on the road over Passo della Cisa. Then I walk on to Portremoli. So I do the route in just the 2 stops. You could also stop at Bercetto, which is an option along the way too, to shorten the days.
That's very inspiring what you said. Very, very inspiring indeed. And then into Tuscany, any particular secrets there? Any corners that you particularly loved?
Yes, of course, I fell in love with Lucca and moved here. So I came through in 2016, sat at Piazza San Frediano with a cup of tea and looked up at the mosaics on the San Frediano church, which, by the way, for any Irish that are here, San Frediano was Irish. And he was a 6th century saint that came and became a monk and then a hermit and then the Bishop of Lucca, and made many miracles. And they loved him and named this glorious church after him. I'm sad to read on Facebook when people say, oh, don't start in Lucca, because the walk between Lucca and Alto Pascio is not very nice. And so, true, it's mostly along the roadside. There is an interesting church there that I think is worth stopping to see. But there's an alternate route that my friend and I have been exploring. It's an official alternate that follows the aqueduct, the mid-19th century aqueduct, up into the mountains south of Lucca, and then cuts north to Alto Pascio. It's 26 kilometers. I didn't know about it before I wrote my guidebook. I don't think there's a good excuse if you're starting in Tuscany not to start in Lucca. In my opinion, it's one of the top towns, certainly one of the top towns I've ever seen in Italy. The walls encircle it completely, the Renaissance era walls. Inside the walls are all picturesque palazzos and such from 15th century onward. It's beautifully historic. I love living here.
Sandry, you're selling Lucca beautifully. I'm going to fast forward you to Rome. The final day into Rome has been much improved, and I see that reflected in your guide. You no longer have to effectively follow the traffic up the Via Francigena. And could you talk us through that, which is sort of really a big plus?
Yeah. So the last day starts in La Storta. And La Storta is on the Via Cassia, which goes all the way into Rome. It's a Roman road originally. And in 2016, I walked along the road all the way into Rome because I thought that was the only way. But it's not. Since that time, they identified a place where you could avoid, you come off the Via Cassia after crossing over the freeway, and you go into the nature preserve, where occasionally you can see apartment blocks around you, but this nature preserve has pastures and paddocks. There are flocks of sheep that are wandering around, and you're in the outskirts of Rome, but you're also walking through pastures. And that is 3 to 5 kilometers. Then you come into a neighborhood where there are plentiful sidewalks, there are services there, and you come on to the Via Trajana, and you end up at the Monte Mario Park. And Monte Mario is on the north side of Rome, looking down on the totality of the city. And so you see the northern parts of the city as you come around the mountain. Then you get to the Monte de Gozo, as in Camino de Santiago viewpoint, where you for the first time see the Vatican, which here is about 4 or 5 kilometers away. It's off in the distance, it's about this big, but it's your aha moment. And you practically run down the ramps, run down along the Via degli Angeli, and then you're right at the door of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. It's quite a nice entry. Really no reason to avoid it.
I think that's spectacular, but a wonderful place to sort of just park up briefly, because I think we're now going to field a few questions. So David, I'll hand back to you. And thank you, Sandy, for really very entertaining and, sort of, we've walked the Via Francigena with you and in good company.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks so much both to Brian and Sandy. That's been really exciting and brilliant to hear about. We are going to move on to questions now for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will break off into breakout rooms so we can all have an opportunity to chat and discuss with each other before closing up. So the first question comes from Daniel Lavoy. If you want, when you're asking a question, if you want to unmute yourself and ask it directly, maybe introduce yourself and say where you're dialing in from. That would be great. So Daniel, do you want to ask your question?
Okay. Do you hear me?
We do.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Okay, works good. Good afternoon. Good evening. My wife and I are we were planning to do the Via Francigena starting in Canterbury, but from what I read, it appears that France may be a little difficult in terms of lodging. And I was wondering whether we should do the Italian part instead of the French part.
Well, in fact, I want to make sure Brian knows he can answer these questions as well as I, but I'll take the first stab at this. What is your daily average in terms of distance that you're aiming at? I wonder, Daniel.
About 25.
About 25. There are 3 or 4 sections in France where you're in the 30 to 35 range. So that might work against you in France. There are lots of good resources out there for lodging. And it's very helpful if you know a little bit of French so that you can talk to people on the phone. There are resources, including the Via Francigena app, which has quite a few. The French, I'm going to just hold it up, the Fédération Française de la Via Francigena. Oh, that's the Northern France guide from the GR, the Fédération Randonnaise, which is good. They're coming out with the Southern guide to the French section soon as well. This is the best that I found, the best printed guide for accommodations. The British Confraternity may have a better guide available, but I found this worked just fine for me. The accommodation listings are quite detailed. You can see where I stayed, I circled them, and they give, that was upside down. Well, they give lots of information, including price ranges and things like that. So,
and that comes from the Fédération de Randonnée Pédestre de France?
No, this is Fédération Française de la Via Francigena.
Oh, okay.
So that's a different one. And I can see, it's www.ffvf.fr. I'll just type it into the chat here so everybody can get that. But but yeah, that's my opinion. Also, the app that I mentioned has quite an extensive list of accommodations. And then if you go to the official Via Francigena website, which is viafrancigena.org, they have accommodation listings, just pages of them that are very, very helpful. I'll type their web address here as well. So there are resources, and there it is, viafrancigena.org. There are resources. If you study them and know what you're looking at, you can plan your way through it and you can make it. It does take planning. And even with planning, you may discover the occasional time when you wish that you'd stopped at that grocery store yesterday because there isn't a grocery store today, or an open restaurant because it's Sunday night or Tuesday night, and even an open bakery, which is a crime in France. Brian, anything to add?
Well, Sandy, I totally go along with that. And of course, it ultimately depends also on your budget. I mean, the French have a lovely word for it. And I understand, Daniel, that you speak some French. I mean, on se débrouille, you know, you'll get by in some way or other. And there's always Airbnb as well. And ultimately, unless you're a total purist, if you need be, you can call for a rural taxi. You know, you can fast forward if you find yourself in trouble. So there are lots of ways of skinning the cat. I wouldn't be put off by you know, not, if you like, you know, by the sort of the apparent relative lack of infrastructure in France. It's not that bad. You know, France remains better endowed with rural hotels than certainly than a country like England. I mean, you know, it is still spectacularly well observed, resourced. But what Sandy says is true. You know, that il faut en profiter. If you pass you know, a bakery, a boulangerie early in the morning, it's better to buy that sandwich for the day there and then, rather than say, I'll get one at the next town, because the likelihood is the next time we'll have nothing, and so on. So a little bit of provisioning. When I first started long distance walking, used to take I never took a tent. I work on the sort of rather patrician basis that a credit card, a bank card, weighs less than a tent. And that means that I would have find myself accommodation in hotels. But I also occasionally would carry a bivy bag, having been a high distance, high altitude mountaineer over the years, and I've never ever had to use it. So, you know, in all my years of walking the length and breadth of Western Europe, I've never been caught out. So, you know, touch wood, I've been lucky or whatever. So on the whole, the big void out there is not quite as bad as you might imagine it to be.
No, I agree with you. A credit card and a SIM card.
Yep. Yeah, and don't forget Airbnbs too. There's and you know, if you get by in French, you'll find a lot of people will help you. You know, if you but there are two types of travelers. You know, there's those the true traveler who sets out in the morning without knowing where he or she is going to sleep, and then there's the wimp like me who knows where they're going to sleep, because I actually like to have a hot bath at the end of the day. So I've always planned it in advance, worked it out in advance, and I find that part of the fun, if you like, but it's perhaps less adventurous. Anyway, but don't be disturbed by France. It is perfectly okay.
Thank you to both of you for your generous answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really that was both very useful information from Sandy and Brian. I think let's move on to the next question, because we've got quite a few coming in, so I want to cover as much ground as possible. Mark, you are next on Mark Goodman. If you would like to unmute, introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Hi, Sandy. Nice to see you.
Hi, Mark. Great to see you too. Are you in New Mexico? Where are you?
Yeah. A beautiful day here. So it's been wonderful to hear, Sandy, both you and Brian talk about the Via Francigena. And as you know, Sandy, I'm planning on doing that next year or the year after. But my question is for the guidebooks. You've said that you're going to document the official route as well as shortcuts, but speak a little bit about your own sort of personal input into the guidebooks, about you know, recommendations for historic spots or not to be missed places, or, you know, highlights, so as not to take only the official route or the shortcuts, but sort of to nuance it, if you will, as to mesh the two.
Mhm. Oh, that's cool. What a great question. Well, I am a sucker for a medieval church. And if there's something that's Romanesque or Gothic or High Gothic, that's where I want to be. So I always point those out in my guidebooks, and I share as much as I can about them, within the space available. And I should say this first volume, since it covers the entire GR 145 route in 55 stages, is going to be the longest and thickest of the 3 guidebooks. So that really mandates that I cut down the descriptions as much as possible. The route is pretty well marked, and so there doesn't have to be highly detailed walking directions, and that's good. So I try to highlight what the scenes, the settings are, what the train is like along the way. I talk some about the churches and the art. And I want to share everything that I know about what's on the route. So at that town where the stained glass is spectacular, but you have to know to talk to the guy across the street, so he'll let you in and give you a tour of the crypt and the stained glass windows. I'll point that out. So those kind of things, to the extent that I'm aware of them and can research and share them, that's kind of insider stuff I'm interested in sharing.
I would again concur with Sandy, but with one proviso, and that again is a matter of technique and tactic. The great thing about walking is that it's really an anarchist sport, in the sense that it's probably the last human activity left in the world that is not in one way or another regulated. And therefore there are absolutely no rules. You can do absolutely as you wish. And each walker has his own or her own particular pace and so on. But one of my golden rules has always been that you're either a walker or a tourist. And as a long distance walker, I'm quite ruthless about not deviating to see the medieval church that Sandy talks about. I mean, I will see things if they're on my way, chemin faisant, no problem at all. I don't mind stopping off and seeing as many things that are actually on the route, but I will not deviate, because once you start deviating, you are on a different sort of holiday. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. If you want to spend your, if you want to double your distance or your time walking, that's your problem. That's your prerogative. But most people who are doing something really serious, like a 2,000 kilometer walk, are going to be more focused on the actual process of keeping the body going, the mind going, functioning, resting, and so on, than you are about stopping off to see scenic things on the way. Some people can manage both, but I personally am sort of, I'm not ambidextrous, and I prefer just to stick to the walking.
Well, I think that's a great strategy. I think, Brian, you've hit you hit the nail on the head, the way most people approach walking. For me, I'm part tourist, I guess. And so when I come to a World War I battlefield in France, I want to know about it. I'm going to go inside of the monumental church that's in the middle of it. I want to know who did the mosaics or frescoes. And so that's probably why it takes me longer to get a shorter distance. But they're both worthy approaches.
Each to their own.
Absolutely. As Brian says, there are no rules. It's an anarchist pursuit. Thanks so much, Mark. I think that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Good to see you.
The next question. Thank you. The next question comes from Brian Hunt. Brian, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question and say where you're dialing in from, that'd be lovely.
Hi, Sandy and Brian. Thank you for all the information. It's fantastic. We're from Dublin, so we've been busy writing notes here about the place in Italy, where the Irish saint was. But I just one quick thing to say that might help others. We're going we're going walking from Canterbury to as far as Aosta this year, but we've kind of booked virtually every night, and we haven't had to walk those distances. We're walking, I think the 6 numbers shorter. And be honest, I zoomed in on Google Maps, and if you visit to little villages, you'll often see a bed, you know, and then you'll get a phone number and you can text somebody and you'll find it's not listed anywhere, but you get a booking. And so now some of them I've had to send them money, and I hope they're going to be still there when I get there. But that's just maybe might help somebody there who Daniel who was talking about. Our question was, we've watched various YouTubes, we've followed you actually when you were, and we keep hearing about people starving for a couple of days, and I'm on it now. If there was even just a couple of areas that you say these are really bad areas, just you talked about maybe before Chalon and on Champagne, where maybe it's desert or there's long distances. It's just for me saying, Janie, we better with some to have with
Brian, your connection, sorry to interrupt, Brian. Sorry to interrupt. Your connection is a little bit difficult, but I think we understood the question. I can see it in the chat, so I'm just going to repeat it, which is that those very specific sections where people are concerned about running out of supplies of food and water. And there's another question in the chat, which is where it's possible to get lost due to very poor signage. So signage and any particular deserts to mention. I think we sort of touched on it, but if you could, yeah, that's Brian's question.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So I don't think you're ever in trouble for running out of water. You should have a couple of liter capacity with you. The funny thing about France is, unlike Spain and Italy, there are not water faucets in the plazas. And to me, it's the strangest thing. In Italy, they're everywhere, and same in Spain. But there's always a farmhouse, or as Brian mentioned, a cemetery. And so you can find it, you can find water, you may have to ask for it. For me, I wish that I had always had in my backpack a package of pasta and some tomato paste, so I could always make my own dinner. Because a couple of times I anticipated that there would be a restaurant in town. I think I already alluded to the fact that some restaurants are closed on Sunday. So you get to a town, maybe it's a holiday or it's a Sunday, and the restaurant is closed and the grocery store is closed. That's where your pasta in your pack comes in handy. So if you have a few other things like that, you're going to be fine. I used to always carry a chocolate croissant or two extra. Unlike Brian, I have had to stay outside because I couldn't find lodging, not in France or Italy, but in Spain. And I was happy to have a sleeping bag then, and also my foil Mylar emergency blanket. So I think those are handy things to have. And so there are some kind of food deserts out there. And when you get south before you get to Long, there's one there. There are a couple of the official stages that end in places where there's not an or anything actually. Dienville is one of those. It's really kind of odd that they would end a stage there. But in my guidebook, I'll be working that out. I never have a stage end where there's not accommodations. So So all I can say is come prepared with a little extra in your pack, and then you really don't hardly ever have to worry. Brian, how would you answer
Well,
that?
Sandy, I mean, I agree that France has got that irritating business of, if it's Sunday, they're closed, or if it's Monday, they're closed, and so on. And it's becoming increasingly a problem. But you still also débrouille, you still can get by. And it's just a matter of being a bit more deft, sometimes phoning in advance, sometimes, contacting locals. But I think to actually arrive in a French, I mean, it depends how well you've done your research, but if you found a chambre d'hôte or a bed and breakfast, or some sort of accommodation, above a restaurant or something, you will be okay. And at the end of the day, if we lose a meal here or there, it's not the end of the world. So I mean, it's
That's right.
Got to sort of think about what's happening in Ukraine right now. I mean, sort of, the idea of missing out on a pasta is not a big deal. But I mean, I say that as somebody who actually likes to have his evening pasta. But if you look at it in the broader context of the world today, hey ho, not a big deal.
There you go. And now you reminded me of something, Brian, and that is I wasn't aware of how you can go to a gîte that, for instance, is in somebody's home. It's maybe a little apartment that they have adjacent to their house. And you can ask for a demi-pension. I knew what demi-pension was. I just didn't realize that it's commonplace at many of the private homes.
Well, it's more the chambre d'hôte than the gîte. The gîte tend to be for renting out for more than a few days. They tend to do the weekly rents, but they will on occasions also do an evening meal, a table d'hôte as they call it. But the chambre d'hôte, you'd be amazed if you Google, and I hate to praise Google, but if you Google the town or the village that you're aiming to get to, and you put in hotel, chambre d'hôte or something, you'd be amazed what comes up there.
Let me give an example of what I was talking about. I came to the town of well, it was before Amet, and I was at I guess you would call it a chambre d'hôte of a lovely woman. And I said, where's the grocery store? And she looked heartbroken because I asked for the grocery store.
She was going to feed you.
She was wanting to feed me. And
she's the lovely woman. She's the lovely woman in the Pigerie farm, in the farmhouse.
That's right. That's exactly right.
No. She's a famous character on the Via Francigena. I mean, she's been looking after people on the Via Francigena for the best part of 25 years, and her husband keeps pigeons, and in fact, I remember one evening with her sort of saying, well, what happens to the pigeons who don't turn out to be good flying birds? And he says, you're eating one.
That's right. I could never get into eating pigeons.
Also a very poignant lady in that I said that I'd just come back from doing the Camino Frances, and there was a lot of cancer on that, and people self-curing and recovering from it and so on. She said, yes, well, I too have cancer. So it's lovely to know that she's still very much alive and well. So, but that's who you were staying with. And yeah, she obviously, she not only feeds pilgrims, she also used to, she's probably given up now, but she used to insist on taking photographs of everyone. She took a photograph of you?
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's part of the, I hope you've given her a special mention in your guidebook. Or you
don't you worry. And let me say,
pop me an email, and I'll give you background about her, because she's very special.
Great.
And of course, that is the town that has the knees of the saint. I forget his name. The saint who famously died.
The pilgrim saint. Yeah,
the pilgrim saint who died in Rome and from sort of hunger and malnutrition. But
yeah, it'll take me a minute. I'll remember that.
But his knees are there.
Yeah, my remaining point is that I was asking her for ingredients to cook on the stove at her place, And then when I was all done and it tasted terrible, I thought, what kind of mistake have I made? And so I didn't make that mistake anymore. I always asked for demi-pension if I was staying in a private home. So that's a good resource for you.
That is very useful to know. I'm gonna crack on because I would like to get through 4 questions before we move into the breakout rooms. So if we maybe answer these a little more briefly, just so we can get through everyone's questions. Terry Zitnak, if you're next, it should, I think if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, yeah, I'm actually Ken, Terry's husband. We're walking as a team, dialing in from Northern Alberta, Canada. And I think the question's been sort of answered already, but we're still mulling over the idea of bringing a tent and, having to stealth camp or camp in general. And I get the impression you don't really need to do that, but I'd like to hear some recent experiences.
I personally would not bring a tent. I think a tent is helpful if you're really trying to keep the budget low. I don't encourage rough camping. I think you should always ask for the property owner's permission before you do that. I think you miss out when you're camping because you're not in a town, so you can't go to the restaurants and the grocery stores. You wake up, not having had a shower and using the outdoors as a toilet. I'm not in favor of that, except in planned campgrounds, which there are some along the way.
Well, I would totally concur there in that Western Europe is not the sort of place for wild camping. If you want to go wild camping, head off to Tibet or something. I mean,
to Canada.
Canada. You're missing out on 9/10 of the experience, which is the combination of urban and country.
This was kind of an emergency thing for us if we ran into the situation where there was absolutely nothing else. We weren't.
A bank card weighs less than a tent.
Yes.
Because you don't just carry a tent, you then got to carry a sleeping bag. It's suddenly, and that's another thing that I think 90% of people setting out on the Via Francigena make the fatal mistake of carrying too much with them. My ideal pack weighs considerably less than 10 kilos, much less.
Terry, I wish you had your video on so we could heckle you right into your eyes.
Thank you.
But there will be other people that disagree with us. So do what you will. I have seen many people that send their camping gear back once they get into Italy.
It was going to be an emergency situation for us. And I just wondered if you guys ever ran into the fact that you would need it. And I guess not. Is what I hear.
The word emergency in Western Europe is sort of, unless you're on the border of Ukraine right now, is kind of overblown. It's not the right word. You won't have an emergency. You can't have an emergency like that.
Thank you.
Good question. That always comes up. I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah, I often represent the budget end of the Confraternity's talk. So I did camp quite a lot in France and Switzerland, but that was because I think my bank balance is considerably less healthy than Brian's, and if I took my card along, it wouldn't have been that useful always. So I had to carry something a bit heavier. But Celia Ross is next. Celia, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandy and Brian, and it's great seeing all the faces of people who are doing or going to do pilgrimages. I want to go do a solo walk this summer, and I've got 2 questions. I've heard that the signage, if you go backwards from Rome up to Canterbury, can be difficult. And the other thing I'm worried about is the green pass. If the green passes are still necessary in Italy, I'm a Canadian, so I can't get one. Is that going to be a handicap?
Yeah. I'll answer the second question and then leave walking backwards to Brian. The Green Pass restrictions in Italy are going to change the end of this month, March 31st. And we have been in a state of emergency for some time. And the Super Green Pass was required for almost any building or restaurant, certainly sleeping area you went into. I have just the American CDC card, and it's worked for me every place except the post office, which requires a scan. So on the other hand, some accommodations are closed because of COVID requirements still. And who knows what will happen when you start your walk. Depends on what the status is of government regulations at that time. Right now, the hostel in Lucca at Misericordia is closed. And they've been closed for over 2 years now. So I hope that things will be back up. I think the CDC card is less of, or the Super Green Pass or Green Pass is less of an issue than whether a multi-bed accommodation like a hostel is open or closed.
Thank you.
Celia, I can just say that walking backwards was pretty much straightforward. Obviously, Italy is better signposted than the rest of the Via Francigena, certainly better than France. And to some extent in France, I made my own route back. I tended to deviate from the Via Francigena using other ways, I mean, canal clip-outs and so on. Italy, it has to be said, when the Italian government embraced the Via Francigena, they did actually decree, and of course decrees in Italy are one thing, what happens on the ground is another thing, that they should have it waymarked both north and south. And that is pretty much has happened in most of the Via Francigena. I mean, perhaps Tuscany is the best. They, as Sandy knows, they have put in mileposts, and very impressive they are too. So you'd have no difficulty in sort of walking backwards, if you like. In France, you'd have the same challenges that we've discussed earlier, which is that you've got a slightly circuitous route, and there are actually using a map. There are probably maps plural. There are better ways of achieving the distances you need to get all the way back to Canterbury.
Thank you.
Your smartphone is a great resource for you. The Via Francigena app will work whichever direction you're going. And you can also download the GPS tracks. And some people don't like looking at the smartphone. They think it kind of detracts from walking. I find making a wrong turn detracts from walking even more. So I encourage it.
Thank you very much. We'll have one more question, I think, before we move on into the breakout rooms. So Amy Bernstein, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So my name's Amy and I'm from Seattle.
What? Oh gosh, I'm from Seattle. Hi, Amy.
Hi. So I usually travel alone. I'm wondering how solo an event it is, or do you run into a lot of other pilgrims? And then my second quick question is, do you really not need a sleeping bag? Because it never occurred to me not to have a sleeping bag.
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, what time of the year and what part or all of the Via Francigena will you be walking on?
I'm hoping to go in spring and summer of 23, and I'm hoping to do the whole thing.
Okay. I would say that you'll rejoice when you see another pilgrim in France. It's a little bit uncommon to see somebody else in France. You may see people starting in Switzerland, and as summer, continues, you'll see more and more people in Italy. So the times that I walked in France, I saw 2 other pilgrims the entire time. I was there for almost 2 months. That was in the late fall, the September through early November. In Italy, I've hardly ever walked without other people after, I would say, maybe Ivrea or so. There are people out there, but it's not like the Camino Frances. It's not like the Camino Portuguese. The numbers are much, 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 much fewer. So if you go expecting solitude, your expectations will be met. If you go with the sense of surprise and delight when you see people, then you're lucky. In the summertime, though, I think you will see people, especially on the weekends.
I would totally, again, concur with Sandy. It's like a sort of funnel. You start off with a very wide sort of area, and the chances of bumping into another pilgrim are small. But as you approach the Alps, and from then onwards, you will start meeting fellow pilgrims. But it is never going to be like the Camino. The Camino is walked on an industrial scale. Although the Via Francigena, the Associazione would like to see it being trodden on an industrial scale. Actually, the numbers just are not there, except closer to Rome. I would like to reassure you, Amy, that we've had a number of women, young women, who've done the Via Francigena in its entirety from Canterbury all the way to Rome, and they've all come back, feeling totally confident in being solo and never felt any serious sort of threat and so on. So be reassured on that. It's very an important message that it's a very safe environment. I mean, as safe as you'd have walking anywhere in Washington or whatever. So I mean, Washington State, not Washington DC.
Thank you very much.
Good question, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move into breakout rooms for the next 8 minutes. Previously, when we've run these events, they are really useful opportunities to chat and share either past experience or future plans. So just encourage you to introduce yourselves and perhaps reflect on what we've listened to. But yeah, share those plans or memories. I'm going to open the rooms now, and they'll close just before past, so we can have some closing reflections. So I'll see you in 8 minutes. Hi, Sandy. People are coming back in 7 seconds. So I'll invite you
Okay,
to make some comments and then close up if you want to.
right.
Oh, no, it's now in a minute. Sorry, everyone's coming back in 1 minute. Yeah, cool. I'll put the link to your website in the chat once everyone's back in, and a few other links as well. But I thought that went really well. Really enjoyed amazing contribution. So fruitful.
Good, thank you. Yeah, it's fun to have an interviewer that really knows the route very well. So that was really cool. Great choice to have Brian do that. I was going to say that I should have remembered that when you did it, you camped quite a bit. That was one of the great things that you brought to that conversation we had some months ago.
Yes, yeah. People are rejoining. That's great. Lovely. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you found your breakout rooms a useful and fun experience talking with other pilgrims or future pilgrims. I'm going to post some links in the chat now. The first one is the link to Sandy's website if you'd like to know any more about him or his other projects. And we then have a link to the shop where Sandy's guidebooks for the Francigena are available, as are many other things. So do feel free to browse there. The third link is for joining the Confraternity. If you're not already a member, we're a membership-based organisation and we exist to support our members and anyone else on the Francigena. So do consider joining if you haven't already. We would love to have you. And the final thing I posted is just the info@pilgrimstorome.org.uk, which you can email at any time with any sorts of queries about the Francigena or about the Confraternity, and I will do my best to respond to you. I'd like to really thank Brian and Sandy for being such brilliant. Oh, sorry, I think Brian, I've just made you very large. I'm just going to join you in, but I'd like to really thank Brian and Sandy for what a wonderful and fruitful discussion. I don't if either of you would like to share some closing remarks.
I just want to thank Brian for a great interview. Brian, it makes all the difference in the world when somebody has walked the same route. So you had good questions and I found it a stimulating conversation. Thank you.
Well, Sandy, you're too kind. And David, thank you for comparing it so well. But above all, thank you all of those who took part, because you enriched and enlivened and made this event really what it was, which was a very, very special occasion. And goodness me, every time I find myself talking about the Via Francigena, I want to get back out there again. And I can't wait to do that. And I will be doing later on this year. I'll be going back to do a bit more to see my great friend Danilo. But Sandy, congratulations on that fantastic work you've done. And we look forward to volume 1. And we look forward to seeing you out in Lucca or somewhere on the route.
For sure. If you're coming through Lucca, make sure to stop in.
I'll be there. I'll be there. All right.
All right.
Thank you all, and
you.
bye-bye, and happy walking.
Everyone so much for coming. Just to echo Brian, it's really great to see people from such a diverse range of places. So that's a thrill for us. Thank you all so much for your donations and participating as well. The Confraternity is a volunteer-led charity, and the donations go to continue on our work on the Via Francigena. So I hope you enjoyed coming. Thank you all so much. If you do have any questions, you can send through an email. But thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Arrivederci.
Bye now.
Bye all. Bye.